Hi, Kiran. Thanks for sending in these new essays. Let's take a look at what you've done here, okay? So, we have the mean band scores for IELTS. Here's what you wrote. The given bar, it's called a bar chart, okay? Remember, line graph, pie chart, bar chart. So, the given bar chart shows the mean band scores of academic IELTS in the 4 modules of the male and female candidates for the year 2012. Good. Overall, it can be observed that females scored not more bands, that's not accurate, as compared to males in all these English language testing sections. And then you list them yet again. You didn't need to list them again. You list them here. That was enough. As I said, I didn't like this more bands. They scored a higher band, or they scored higher as compared to males. That would have been good. Okay? They scored higher. Probably would have been the best way to say this. Of all the 4 sections, female candidates scored the highest with an average of 6.1 in both listening and reading. On the other hand, male candidates scored the highest average of 5.8 each in listening, reading, and speaking. Okay, I don't really understand that. How did women score the highest in listening and then men scored highest in listening as well? That doesn't make sense. So I'm assuming you mean something else than what you've actually written here. We'll look at it in a minute. This shows that the performance of men is in this English language test. No, this shows that the performance of men in this English language test is similar in all these modules of listening, reading. Okay, this is very repetitive, okay? Both male and female applicants received low bands in writing with 5.4 and 5.6 respectively, but in speaking, males were at 5.8, which is 0.1 less than that of females. Apostrophe after the S, average speaking score. All right, this feels really rather repetitive to me. And I think that you probably could have done a little more. Now, I know you reached, yeah, I was right. It was 152. So I knew that you got the minimum word count, but I felt like you kind of were fluffing up things that you didn't need to. Like you mentioned this listening, reading, writing, and speaking. You did that twice, and I could kind of tell that that was your way of kind of making sure you hit that 152 mark. And I don't blame you for trying to do that, but that's probably not the best way to do this. So let's look at the kinds of things you could have said here. Okay, so let's look at the chart together. So basically, in terms of the organization of your answer, you have a couple of choices to make. You can talk about females first and then talk about males, or you can talk about the similar scores first and then the dissimilar scores. So you could talk about reading and listening together, and then in the next paragraph you can talk about writing and speaking together. So you have a couple of choices to make. I think that because there is so little data here to work with, that you may want to deal with the females first. I have a suspicion that it's going to lend itself to better development and better extension so that you can hit that 150 words. So if I were going to try to do this, I would definitely start by saying, overall, it is clear that women scored higher than men in all 4 task areas. Specifically, the highest score in the 2012 IELTS was awarded in listening and reading, both with 6.1. Okay, so that's how you deal with that. And then you can say the next highest score, the next highest average score was found in the speaking test, where women scored 5.9 on this test. At 0.3 lower was the writing section, which was the lowest score for the women. And then you can start a new paragraph and you can say, on average, men scored 0.2 points lower than the females. Okay, which is, I mean, it's an assumption. I'm assuming that, but I'm pretty sure it's true. And then you can say the highest scores for males was found in 3 of the sections. Men scored 5.8 in listening, reading, and speaking. Okay? At point 4 lower was the writing section, where men scored 5.4. This is the lowest score in the chart. Okay, and you could even say something like, and it is 0.7. It has a 0.7 difference from the highest score in the chart, specifically women's listening and reading, which scored 6.1. Okay, so you could have done some stuff like that, just kind of extending and comparing and doing something. So that's one way you could have done it. Okay, like I said, you could have also dealt with these together and these together, but I think that when you do something like this, like organizing, listening, and reading together, it doesn't really lend itself to this kind of extension. That's just, experience talking, but that's how I probably would have done this, okay? The grammar was good. There was no problem. The vocabulary was also good. No problems there. Like I said, I just felt like you kind of were a little repetitive, and maybe you could have selected some different things to talk about. So I guess you would say that the task achievement for me is what's lacking here, and maybe a little bit some of the organization of your ideas. So coherence and cohesion as well. But the other areas were well controlled. So let's take a look now at your task 2, which is about spending money on art. Okay, so here's what you said. Several governments around the globe make large amount of expenditures on art, which is believed to promote quality in individual's life. All right, I want to change some of this around because some of this is awkward. First of all, let's talk about the word several. I know that it means more than 2 or 3, but it does have this effect like it's limiting you. So several is maybe 4 or 5. You don't really want to say that because you don't really know how many governments. So several is not the kind of word that gives us this idea that lots of governments are doing this. It's just kind of like, there's a handful of them, but we don't really know that for sure. So try not to use several in this context. Instead, let's use something else. You could say numerous governments around the world make considerable expenditures on art, which is believed to promote quality in individuals' lives. It's not just one life, it's many lives. So I think I would prefer that. I support that the governments must make sophisticated endeavors, this is spelled wrong, and so is this, for the welfare of the people rather than spending on arts. Okay, so when you say sophisticated endeavors, what are you trying to tell us? That they should spend money on other things? Okay, this word sophisticated doesn't really help us understand what you're talking about. So it's this kind of vague term that you've used here. Doesn't really help you. Maybe you could have been a little more specific here. Okay, so firstly, it is unfair to spend the money of taxpayers on, you don't build a sculpture, you create a sculpture, on creating sculptures and art. This is because there are very few people who see art as a source of entertainment in their life. Therefore, just to satisfy the minority, it is unjust. Justice is the noun. Injustice doesn't exist. You want to say unjust. So it is unjust for those taxpayers, one word, whose money is being used on making art galleries and museums. For instance, you make art galleries. Well, you don't make the galleries and museums themselves, but you're actually creating the art or supporting the art that goes into those galleries and museums. So this is a little awkward expression here. Okay? So what you could have said instead is, therefore, just to satisfy the minority, it is unjust for those taxpayers whose money is being used to fill art galleries and museums. Now that makes sense. For instance, in India, a big sculpture of Sardar Vallabhbhai Patel is built, or no, has been built with a T, costing, that's not really a word, you should have just said 6 billion. 6 billion what? $6 billion, 6 billion rupees. We're not really clear here. However, on the other hand, people are failing to manage their expenses due to inflation, and many people commit suicide. Suicide is not a verb, it's a noun. They commit suicide every year. Thus, governments, careful with your typing, must make efforts to provide basic facilities for their citizens, because it's governments plural, their citizens, than spending on artwork. Okay. You were on the right track here. I liked a lot of what you said, but some of this needed to be kind of rephrased and dealt with a little differently. So here you talk about this idea with India, and then you say that people are failing to manage their expenses due to inflation. So what are you trying to tell us? How could government spend that money differently? Okay, rather than spending money on this large sculpture, what could the government do to help its citizens? And you don't really make that clear. All right, not here. You say that people are killing themselves because of inflation. All right, well, I understand that. What could the government do in that position? I mean, is there something that government can do? So you have to kind of make this clearer. It's not clear here. And then you say they must provide basic facilities. Well, what are those basic facilities? So we're really left here with some questions. There are some gaps in your logic, and we're not quite able to understand your argument and what you're trying to support here. Okay? So you really need to be careful with this. Okay, now one thing that concerns me is how small this paragraph is, especially considering how large this one is. So you got only 5 lines here, whereas this is like 8 lines. I don't know how long. So it feels a little short just looking at it, okay? And that worries me. Another reason why it worries me is look how long your introduction is. Your introduction extends to 4 lines. So I'm looking at this and all of a sudden predisposed to feeling kind of like, uh-oh, this looks like it's underdeveloped, all right? You don't want that. So let's see what you actually said, though. Secondly, the ruling parties are expected to generate more opportunities of employment for the people, rather than spending on one's quality of life. If there is less employment in a country, people would have decent amounts with an S to spend, careful with your typing, for their own satisfaction. Thus, they can buy the paintings themselves, so there is no requirement of shelling huge funds for creating these art spaces. Yeah, definitely feels underdeveloped. I mean, first of all, if you look at it, there's only 3 sentences here. Look, 1, 2, 3. And I'm confused. I need some extension. I need some tangible evidence here. I'm not really sure what you're trying to say. You're talking about the ruling parties. So what do you mean here? Who are these people? Are these like the people in power? Are these the people who just have money and kind of, who are you talking about? It's really not clear. So maybe you could have talked a little bit more about this. Like, how could these ruling parties create more employment? What could they do? So, and how can the government fit into this? So again, we're dealing with some gaps in your logic here, okay? You really need to extend this a little further. Answer some of these questions and make sure that they're clear to anyone reading this. To sum up, there is a need for the bureaucrats to understand the real necessity of their citizens. Therefore, there is a strong need to focus on creating more employment opportunities and fulfilling the basic requirements of the people's life. Okay, here I would have liked these issues are more important than creating artwork to create quality of life for a small minority. Okay, that's the kind of thing you need to just say you need to just take one extra little step there. Add this idea of this comparison of this, what you're supporting, versus this idea of artwork for the citizens, okay? So some good things happening here, but again, like I said, there were some gaps in your logic, and I want to make sure that those gaps are filled, because this is what's going to make the difference between a decent essay and a really good essay, okay? So work on those things a little bit, think about them, see if you understand my feedback and how you can kind of apply some of these issues and suggestions, okay? Go ahead and write a next set. I'm assuming that we have another set together. I do have to double check, but I'm assuming we do. So go ahead and get started, and I'll be waiting for more essays.